let's chat about homesteading, the homesteading principle. And this conversation is about philosophy, social theory, how people get along with each other, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, hopefully you'll enjoy this. Homesteading theory is the idea that the world is a big place, and the first person to go out and find a hunk of land that nobody else has claimed or is using, if that person then claims it and makes use of it, then they get to own it or control it for the rest of their lives, including selling it or gifting it to a child or whatever. But they have claimed, they have homesteaded this hunk of land, and now they own it. And that is kind of the beginning of how land goes from its natural state into being owned, or the use of it controlled by, owned by humans. And that's the basic principle. And then there are a lot of questions that come out of that: property rights, homesteading, that whole conversation. There are a lot of nuances and fine points to think about. But what I would like to chat about today are, I guess, is documentation. It's important that you document and that the people around you agree with your ownership of that property. The Mormons are very good at documenting genealogy. There are records now online, probably permanently saved somewhere, even if when the governments take the interwebs down, it'll still be saved somewhere. Somebody has it all saved. And even if Salt Lake City is destroyed, um, there will still be a record of genealogy stuff. So that is a good job doing documentation. And modern technology, things like paper and pens and computers now and AI, like all these technology things, are making it much easier than things were during the first days of civilization or of human Homo sapien existence. An example of doing a really bad job of record keeping is Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, that whole area. And the reason I say it was a bad job that was done is there's a property dispute there, and there has been for coming on 100 years, maybe even longer than that. And two different groups of people think that they, as a collective, have a right to that hunk of land. And then I believe it was 1948 or so, governments got together and said, hey, we agree with this party or that party, and this is how we're gonna say who owns what. But really, that's irrelevant. It's not irrelevant in all the people who are now being murdered, but it's not really relevant to who the actual true property owner is. What matters is that everybody around says, oh yeah, that's Mary's property, and Mary got it from her dad, who bought it from Bill, who was gifted it by his dad, who traded it for a horse, and the guy who he got it from, who was gifted by his parents, and they got it from. And so there's this whole line of, yeah, there's no doubt now that Mary owns that hunk of land. Mary has a house on it. She has a garden on it. She runs a business off of that land. Like, there's no question that anybody has that is Mary's rightful property. And that's how I reckon things ought to be done. Well, where the West Bank messed up is that they didn't keep good records. And both sides are going back and saying the ethnic Arabs and the ethnic Jews, they're going way back and saying, well, yeah, but our great grandfathers homesteaded this, and well, no, mine did. Well, no, this one was stolen. Well, we use the land better because we are on average 15 IQ points higher than other folks. And so on the debate goes, and then people start killing each other because they honestly believe they have a right to that hunk of land. And when I say that hunk, yes, there's the disease of collectivism, that our group owns something, versus an individual owning something. And my understanding is that groups don't generally own something. Just because you're born into the redheaded tribe doesn't mean that you now have a right to something. But that's, I guess that's a different interesting discussion. This argument is going on and people are dying. The Arab people are being cleansed from the area. They're systematically the other side, and they're the people who they are either friends with or control or whatever you want to think about it. Those people are killing the Arabs, getting rid of them, just wholesale getting rid of them. Kind of doing what's the thing called in the Muslim religion, diminitude or dimini or something like that, where the only way we won't kill you is if you'll agree to be agreeable with us and subservient to us and obey us and so on and so forth. Well, that's happening to the people who hold that religion. Um, and it's sad and it's horrible. And there have been times that that side and the other side have done horrible things back and forth to each other. And there are so many people in that area, maybe everyone, whose lives have been touched. And it's hard to go to somebody who honestly believes that they've been wronged. It's hard to go to that person and say, no biggie. Let's just forget about it. Tom Bilyeu, who I respect in many ways, he has some great takes on a lot of things. His argument is, if it happened a little while ago and now the governments have decided such and such, let it go. It's happened to his extended family, his wife's family, and in was it Greece, I think, or wherever. And it happens, so now it's the Chinese took over Mongolia, so now the Mongolians just need to say, hey, we don't get to live here anymore, or we don't own our land anymore. Now the Chinese do. So it's okay. No, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that's the right thing to have happen. Now, is it happening? Absolutely. It has happened historically. There's even a saying. What is it? In a war, the winner gets the spoils, or something to that effect. And so it happens, but I think it's wrong and I think it's horrible. And now, on a little bit lighter note, there was something that an acquaintance brought up many years ago that I don't know that I agree with, and maybe it's just because I'm biased. This person said that in homesteading, he thinks 10 acres is about right. If somebody claims to own more than that, unless they have a really good reason, they shouldn't. If they're just going to live there. Now, I'm sure he would have an exception for somebody who has a huge corn farm and they need 640 acres or a bunch of sections. I'm sure he would have carve something out for that. But just the average person who's going to go and put a house up and maybe an outbuilding or 10 or whatever, that person really only ought to be able to homestead or claim 10 acres. And maybe, and when I said maybe I'm biased, is my wife and I live on 40 acres. And so maybe I'm biased there. And we're not putting it all to good use. Well, what is good use? The use that we put to it, we do hay farming on maybe 15 acres, 15 or 20 acres, I think. And then we have our house and our outbuildings on another, if you were going to draw a border around it, maybe an acre or two are all of the buildings in the house. But the rest of it, we're not really putting to quote unquote productive use. However, we're using it for the view. We love our view. We love looking out at our pond, which we don't put to productive use. We're not using it to generate energy or grow fish or shrimp or whatever. We're not putting it to productive use, but we love that view. Well, then the question becomes thought exercise. And by the way, I don't have an answer to this. I'm putting this out there for you to contemplate. Maybe you can tell me if you have an answer. How much should a person be able to homestead? So let's say that just as an example, let's say that the people calling themselves government, the United States government, say to themselves or say to the world, hey, you know what? We shouldn't exist. we're going to all quit our jobs and go do something productive. And therefore, all of the land that we have, everybody agrees we own, the Bureau of Land Management land, the National Forests, the, yeah, all those kinds of lands, those now, we're just walking away from them. We're abandoning that property. How then might society go about claiming that land? And when I say society, I use the wrong word. How would individuals go about claiming that land? I would love to claim all of it. Like if you just like I'll send a letter in and say, hey, I own it all now, and it's not land is no longer being taxed because governments don't exist. I guess in my example, it was only the federal government. They're not the ones that tax it. So yeah, I wouldn't claim it all if I had to pay taxes. Which I keep catching myself using the wrong words here. Taxes can't be paid. I hope we agree about that. They can be extorted. They can be taken from you. But taxation isn't something you don't pay a carjacker your car. So I used the wrong word when I said pay taxes because that's kind of dumb. But I wouldn't be forced to hand over my money in exchange for having control over a piece of land. What is the size? That was my original point here. What is the size that a human being ought to be able to claim? The view that I look out over from our little cabin stretches for probably 20 miles off to the west, and to the east 35 or 40 miles, probably 50-ish miles to the north. We've got a big hill on our south that's about 1,600 yards away that blocks anything further. But our views stretch for a long way. There's actually a southeastern view that might be more like 80 or 100 miles. What if I said, well, my productive use of that land is the view? I enjoy looking at that view. So therefore, I claim all of it. I homestead all of it. Well, that, I think we could agree, would be too much. Like, well, you can't just go and claim all that. Well, what if other people say, yeah, I get to claim a portion of that and I want to put a skyscraper there? Well, then that hurts my view. I had breakfast a few days ago with a friend who's a former county commissioner in a county, and he was talking about how he once led or voted against somebody building a building because that building would block the sunlight onto someone else's property. And he said, this is, God's gift is the sun rays coming to the earth, and you shouldn't be able to steal those sun rays by, oh, just went by a little herd of bighorn sheep, and two of them were ramming each other, and they were oncoming cars. Okay, I love where I live. Okay, so back to my point now. Sorry for that little break. Let me get back on track. That was cool. Where were we? We were talking about how much land can you claim. I don't know what that limit is. I don't know if you can block the sunlight. I don't know what ought to happen. I guess it could come back to what I think the Anti-Subjectivist Manifesto talked about, which was consent. What do you agree with other people about? There is no magical fairy dust answer as to what is right or what is wrong in the world. Is it right or wrong to flip somebody off? I don't know. Like there's not some magical commandment. Or in many people's opinion, including mine, there's nobody to give that commandment. So who gets to decide that? I don't know. What do you think? How much land could somebody claim? Up in, was it Estes Park or the Grand Tetons, the Grand Teton National Park or whatever? That's beautiful. I'd love to claim that. Well, wait, I can't. Why not? Is 100 feet by 100 feet? Is that all, or it's 10 acres, as the guy said? Is that all, or is it 40 acres? Because that happens to be what I have. Or is it one section? Who decides? How do we decide what you can and can't claim? And what about people who claimed it 100 years ago, 150 years ago, think about when the U.S. government wanted railroads to go across the country. And so to encourage that, they gave off what they didn't really own, I know, but they gave off sections of land to the railroad companies so that the railroad companies could sell those and make money. And that was to encourage them to build their railroads across the country to get it populated by lighter skinned people instead of the Native Americans. Yeah, I know that's wrong, and I said it with kind of a flippant tone, but yeah, that's what they did. What about that land now that in 1970 some family uh, bought it from the railroad? So the government said, we own all the land out there. We're the ones who killed the Mexicans to get it or whatever. And because we killed them and we took it from them, we're the victor. We get the spoils. Now we can give it or sell it. We choose to trade it to the railroad companies. Railroad companies then, from that point forward, once it was on their balance sheet, they ethically and morally disposed of it by selling it to a family. Well, now that family has had 10 of these sections in a checkerboard pattern for 150 years. What is it? Yeah, 155 years. If this happened in 1870, wow, that's a long time. So the family has had it generation after generation. They've been grazing their cattle on it. They've had an agreement with the property owner of the other checkerboard areas, um, which you might see in yellow here. Uh, that shows BLM, Bureau of Land Management land. They made an agreement with those owners, which yes, we both know that the government can't own land, but that's how things seem to be. That's what everybody believes or perceives. So they've been grazing their cattle on this 10 mile by 10 mile area for 155 years. And now there's a big question in Western states about border or corner crossings. So if you look at the yellow and other colored, brown colored property lines between what the government owns and what is actually owned by individuals, the individuals say you can't go across that corner because if we take it to a microscopic level, you would have to either trespass on our land, or if you simply took a step across our land, um, then you'd be blocking our air, our sunlight, or whatever. You'd be invading our airspace. If they erected a 100-foot wall with the corners exactly on the property line, then the two corners would be touching and would go up 100 feet and you couldn't get through. So they have a point. That's their private property. But then on the other hand, the government could also do the same thing. And then the property owner couldn't get to their other piece of property. So maybe that's what needs to happen. I don't know. I'm just bringing up various things having to do with property ownership, homesteading. We've talked about the West Bank. We've talked about how property comes to be homesteaded. We've talked about the problem of corner crossing. And I'm going to close out now with the idea of that's very closely related to corner crossings, which is the donut principle or the donut problem or dilemma. What if your daddy and my daddy, before they died many years ago, my daddy sold your daddy the inner circle, uh, an acre of land that is completely surrounded by uh, by other land that you don't own, or that your daddy didn't buy. He only bought that little inner circle. Well, can the person who owns all the land around it, the meaty good part of the donut, the carb part, if I own that now because my daddy gave it to me, can I prevent you from crossing my land to get to your hole, to your little place of land in the center of the circle? And well, what if you wanted to build a bridge? Could you build it an inch off of the ground? Could you build it 50 feet off the ground? What if I thought the bridge was ugly and it was blocking my view? What then? Um, what if it was 100 feet high? What if it was 100 yards high? At what point would you not be invading my airspace? And if we think about the earth and each little square inch of land goes up, and as it goes up, there's kind of this cone shaped thing, and you own everything above it in that, since the Earth is roughly spherical, I think maybe it's flat, evidently. But as we go out, it's this cone-shaped thing that we own. How high up can I control my airspace? Because every so often these airplanes will fly over, and are they violating my airspace? Should I have something to say about that? I don't think so. I think they're not doing any harm. But that shouldn't be the I don't know. That shouldn't be the measure, I guess, whether or not I perceive harm being done, because then we'd have to have a good definition of harm, et cetera, et cetera. Is blocking a view harm? Who knows? What do you think about all these things? I don't have an answer for them because my principles, I have two different principles and they clash here, and I don't know which one wins out. I think my emotions tell me the person who is in the middle of who purchased land in the middle of this donut, they should be able to get to their land. It's only fair. My feelings are blah blah blah. What if I believe in property rights? And when I say believe in rights, um, believing in property rights is kind of like being a virgin. You are or you aren't. You're not kind of or halfway. No, you are or you aren't. And I don't know I don't know where I come down on this. I believe in absolute property rights. I believe in property rights. But do I? Or do I think the person should be able to get into their donut hole? I think that's a good sentence to end that on. And I suggest that you mention that to somebody later today. Should people be able to get onto their donut